Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode is designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. All right, today we're going to be talking about 2 ways to beat overwhelm, and we'll get there in a few minutes, but I want to share a couple stories with you first, so please be patient with me. Earlier this afternoon, I was preparing myself some lunch. I was chopping up these crowns of broccoli to make myself this kale, broccoli, avocado salad. I just made a Whole Foods run the other day, so I had like 2 pounds of broccoli that I needed to chop up. And when I opened up my refrigerator today to find out that I didn't already have broccoli prepared, I was annoyed. Like, I'm annoyed by the process of having to prepare my meals. I love the end result, but I've always been this person who sees like making the meals and the prep of the meals as kind of this like necessary evil. I do not enjoy the process. And I think that's kind of what separates me from people who really love food and chefs and cooks is like they love and savor each stage of picking the ingredients, putting in the refrigerator, preparing it, like all of that. But for me, I've looked at that as kind of like an annoyance, a necessary evil, something I need to rush through in order to get to my meal. But then while I was chopping the broccoli, just feeling a bit annoyed, I thought about a quote that I read in Phil Jackson's Sacred Hoops. Yes, I'm still on that kick. And I think it was a Buddhist quote about how we reach enlightenment. And it says, all we need to do to reach enlightenment is to chop wood, carry water. Chop wood, carry water, and we can reach enlightenment. What they mean by that is, if we can find peace and presence and joy and connectedness in the most mundane of tasks, in our present moments, then we can actually experience enlightenment by chopping wood, carrying water. Now, as I was chopping the broccoli and I was thinking about that, I was like, wow, instead of being annoyed, what if I were just fully present by chopping this broccoli today? Like what might be possible? And one of the things that popped into my mind was like, here I am, a fully grown adult who gets to choose whatever he wants to eat. I could pick, like, there was a time, right, when we were kids, when I was a kid, where I had no control over. I had some maybe influence over, but I had no control over the meals that were provided to me. I always wanted McDonald's or Taco Bell or, the cookies or brownies. And I had influence over my parents, but it was typically 99.9% their decision. Now, as a full adult, I get to choose whatever it is that I want to eat. And here I am preparing myself broccoli and kale and avocado. If you would have told this to the 10-year-old version of me, I never would have believed it. And the fact is that I actually enjoy eating these healthy foods now. Having a kale, avocado, and broccoli salad with some olive oil, a lemon squeeze, and some pink sea salt is like one of my favorite things to eat. I make it probably 5 times a week. And the fact that I enjoy eating the things that actually are good for me is something that in the moment I recognized, holy shit, I've come a really long, long way. I was a guy who ate like Taco Bell on the daily when I was in college. And now I actually enjoy the things that feel good for me. And so in that moment, when I stopped looking at chopping broccoli as a necessary evil and was present to it, I had that major insight, and I wanted to share that with you in the event that you're going through your day, loathing whatever it is that you're doing or seeing it as the mundane, whether it's your commute or, checking your emails, whatever it is that you find mundane or necessary evil. What if you were to bring a different mindset to it? What might be possible, just like my broccoli story? All right, one more thing before we get to the 2 ways to beat overwhelm. As the protests have started to quiet down, the riots have pretty much receded, and we are now entering this new phase of the revolution, right? Where change is starting to happen, policies are being implemented, statues are coming down, Aunt Jemima's coming off of the Aunt Jemima box. Like, things are changing right now, right? And also, the energy is different, right? It's not as in your face. It's not as ubiquitous as it once was. There are now new distractions. There are now temptations to go completely back to normal. As leaders, as men who are here to be a part of the solution, who are here to be part of creating environments where you and those you care about can thrive, right? That's what we believe as great men, A great man creates environments where he and those he cares about can thrive. And presumably, if you're listening to this podcast, you care about all people. You care that people who look like you and who don't look like you can thrive, right? So as we're entering this new energetic phase of the revolution, how do we stay connected and how do we become part of the solution, stay part of the solution? There are simple ways always all around you. One way, for example, is, and I'm speaking primarily to the white community right now, if you are, say, doing a presentation or using a social media post and you want to use a quote that inspires, can you find a quote from a person of color versus just the easiest available quote? I know when I was in financial services for 15 years, the easiest person to quote was Steve Jobs or Warren Buffett, right? Jeff Bezos also. It was just kind of like boom, boom, boom. Can you put a little extra effort in and quote someone who's a person of color? Let their profile be raised. And my challenge to you is, can you go beyond Martin Luther King, Barack Obama, and Oprah Winfrey? Right? Find someone and research someone. Dig out one of their quotes that means something to you and then learn something about that person and then share, right? I was actually, this came up for me because yesterday I was doing a presentation for a client of mine, a Fortune 75 company who I've been doing this like 6-week program for. And as I was building out the presentation, I was looking for a quote on purpose. And I was like searching for quotes on purpose. And I was like, wait a minute, this would be an unbelievable time to search for someone, either a black person or a person of color that has something to say on the subject. And I ended up finding this quote from Maya Angelou, who's one of the greatest authors of our time, and she passed away a few years ago. I read one of her books earlier, I think late last year. And it was a quote about just, my purpose here is not to just survive, but to thrive and find some passion and have some laughs and be fun and be funny, something along those lines. And feeling like I could put her work forward exposes others who wouldn't maybe have gone to seek her out. That's one simple way to keep this in your consciousness, to be a part of the solution. Another one of the ways to be a part of the solution is to support small Black-owned businesses. I bought some plants today online from a company called The Nice Plant, and I'll link them online for you, or link them in the show notes. And I bought this box called Better Than a Threesome. And it's a box of 4 plants, succulent plants that I can have shipped to me, and I'll be putting them in my windowsills over here. So these are just small little ways, easy ways, if you keep this front of mind, that you can continue to be a part of the solution. All right, let's get to the topic of today, which is 2 ways to beat overwhelm. Now, overwhelm is a feeling that a lot of us have experienced over the last few months, just given the dynamic change of the world that we are going through today. And I'm going to give you 2 ways to beat overwhelm, but let's first have an intervention here. You know how we've talked about on this show that inside every man is a great man, right? There's the you who you are right now, who you are today, and there's also a great man living inside of you, right? This is the man who knows how to live your fullest potential and purpose. Right? This is the guy that has courage, who has vision. This is the guy who has the life force inside of him, right? And you've felt him before. You've tapped him before. He's shown up in your best of moments. And a big part of this show is to learn how to develop a closer relationship with him so you can live him more of the time. But let's be very clear that your great man does not get overwhelmed. Think about that for a second. Your great man does not get overwhelmed. You do. This part of you, this version of you that you are today, gets overwhelmed. Your great man doesn't. And the reason why it's so important to know that is because when you get overwhelmed or you feel that feeling of overwhelm, you can actually pause and connect to some deeper intelligence inside of you to say, what is it that I'm missing here? Right? Because your great man, again, does not get overwhelmed. One of our top 10 most downloaded episodes of all time is Madelyn Moon's 5 ways that men lose credibility with women. And one of the ways that we lose credibility with women is when we do not have integrity with what we can and cannot handle. Think about that for a second. When we lose credibility with women, one of the key reasons why is because we do not have integrity around what we can and cannot handle. And that means if we find ourselves in a place of overwhelm, if we find ourselves overcommitted regularly, if we find that life is too heavy for us, or that life is breeding more life than we can physically sustain, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually sustain, then we're actually not aware of what we can and cannot handle. Being overwhelmed is not sexy. Whether it's to your feminine partner, to your masculine partner, however you identify, like it is not sexy. It is not actually becoming of a leader either. If we are overwhelmed, it's an indication that we misjudge our ability to handle shit, right? So I also think it's important to recognize, not to beat yourself up if you're feeling overwhelmed right now, but it is a wake-up call to say, maybe I'm not so attuned to what I can and cannot handle. So it's an opportunity for you to pause and take a closer look at what your capacity and capabilities are. All right, we've now arrived at the 2 ways to beat burnout. Way number 1 is through pruning, and way number 2 is through aligning. Pruning and aligning. We're going to go deeper into each of these. So first, pruning. Pruning is a way for you to clear the deck, for you to clear space, because if you're overwhelmed, that means you have more on your plate than you can sustain. Now, pruning is a concept that I've learned from Dr. Henry Cloud in his book, Necessary Endings, the employees, businesses, and relationships that all of us have to give up in order to move forward. I've read a number of his books. I think he's excellent. I think he's a leadership coach to CEOs, and I think he's a Christian minister as well. Many best-selling books of his. I also read Boundaries, which is a fantastic book as well. Now, in the book, he says, growth depends on getting rid of the unwanted or the superfluous, right? And he uses the analogy of a rose bush to help clear this up for us. So a rose bush, by its very nature, breeds more life than it physically can sustain, right? It's more life-giving than it can physically sustain. So it requires the care of an expert pruner to prune away 3 different types of rosebuds so that it can flourish to its fullest potential. And in that respect, like, it's very similar to the lives that we live today, right? So and by the way, if there's no pruner, then this rose bush will just kind of grow on its own and it will collapse under the weight of the life that it breeds, okay? So a pruner has to look for 3 different types of rosebuds. The first type of rosebud are the dead rosebuds, right? These are the buds that just need to get snipped to clear space for a new healthy rosebud to emerge. And if you think about the different ways that could show up in our lives, maybe we've sunk a certain amount of money into business or to a passion project or to a relationship that's clearly not yielding any dividends. It's just clearly past its time. If we do not cut that and create space for something else to grow, then we will continue to be carrying the weight of something that no longer serves us, adding to the overwhelm. The second type of rosebud are the weak, atrophied rosebuds, right? These are things that are still kind of giving life, but you've sunk a lot of time and energy into them. Or even if you haven't sunk a lot of time and energy into them, whether they be relationships or where you've placed your attention, that it's not yielding a return either, right? It doesn't make you happy, doesn't make your family happy, doesn't make you smarter, doesn't make you more energized, doesn't make you feel more connected to your purpose. Yeah, maybe at one point in time, whether they were habits or behaviors or relationships, yeah, maybe at one point in time they yielded results for you. But now it's kind of like you put, 50% in, you get 5% back. That's not a great trade-off. Snip. And the third kind of rosebud are the good rosebuds, because good is the enemy of great. The reason why we talk about the great man within you is that most guys who are listening to this show are good in their lives, right? They got a lot of things that they're happy about, grateful for, but good comes at the expense of great, right? Good is when we value predictability, comfort, and control over growth, over pushing your edge, over seeing what you're made of. And oftentimes I find that the most overwhelmed people don't actually know what makes them feel great. So they just kind of fill their plate with a lot of good stuff, constantly saying yes because they're not discerning enough to know what greatness feels like. Marie Kondo, who wrote the book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, her whole philosophy is to take all of your clothes, dump it in one place, and only pick the clothes to keep that sparks joy, right? Like when you wear it, when you hold it up, it sparks joy in your life. There's a greatness to that feeling. And when you discern, when you understand the things that make you feel that way, then you can get rid of 2/3 of everything that you own, at least from clothes perspective. I've actually carried that philosophy over into business opportunities, relationships in my life. You could see how this carries into so many different contexts. And when I figured out how to do that, then when I only said yes to the great things, I stopped finding myself so overwhelmed by all of the good. So pruning allows you the ability to stop overwhelm by creating space, by getting rid of what no longer serves you so that you can have space for the greatness to emerge. And the second way to beat burnout is by looking for alignments in all of the things that you have going on in your life. Now, as guys, one of the things that we seem to be pretty gifted at is being able to focus and deconstruct and compartmentalize and silo things in our lives. Now, that super skill allows us to go really, really deep on a particular area, a particular topic of focus. But when we look at everything as disconnected, as its own separate entity, and don't look for the overlaps in the things that are going on in our lives, then life can start to feel really heavy and overwhelming. You know, like I work with a lot of busy people who are like, you know, I've got to lead this big organization at work, and then I've got my kids who are growing up, and then I got my aging parents over here, and they got to worry about my yoga and meditation over here, and my physical health over there. I'll worry about all the food, you know, the food that I'm eating, and now there's a social movement that I'm educating myself on. Like this feels heavy, over the top amounts of overwhelm, and I understand that because I know what that's like to have a full dance card on the regular. But when I looked at things individually, yes, like it felt overwhelming to me. When I started to recognize and tie together all of the reasons why those exist in my life, to find the common threads through all of them and what they provided in my life, was I able to stop feeling so overwhelmed and notice what every opportunity was providing me. So let me give you a clear example of this. In the Great Man Mastermind, there are 22 men, including myself, who are working together for the next year to discover and live the greatest version of ourselves. Right now, we are on day number 30 of a 90-day challenge to do the 100 consecutive push-up challenge, right? Like this is taking on doing 100 consecutive push-ups in a row and training for that physically. And we've done 30 days worth of training. Now, our group of men like runs the gamut in terms of like physical fitness and strength. And every man here has decided that they're going to step forward and go for it. And many of the guys recognize that 100 is going to be out of their reach, but it's not about the push-ups itself. It's really about playing with their limits, figuring out how far they can go without hurting themselves, figuring out what they're made of, facing discomfort on a regular basis to push their capacity there for growth, for standing in uncomfortable situations without collapsing, without running away, to commit to something for 90 days and to be disciplined and to show up every single day for it, to be a part of a group even though you're doing an individual exercise, to not just make it about yourself, but to also bring the energy for the rest of the group as well. Now, these guys are busy guys who already have more on their plates in their life than they can sustain right now, right? And to add something this big that requires a commitment, if they were to look at it just as a physical exercise, this would be overwhelming to them. Do you get that? If it were just a physical exercise and viewed through that lens, then this would just be another thing to add to their plate. It would be overwhelming, and chances are they would go after it at 60%, right? Probably like they're going after, like they would be doing 60% in other things in their lives. But what we are focusing on is this push-up challenge is a microcosm for everything that you do in your life, right? Like how you show up here is how you show up in every area of your life. So let's look at this as a training ground for this push-up challenge allows me to be dedicated and devoted every single day with quality of intention and focus. How can I bring that to my kids and to my partner and to my employees, right? The same exact way that I'm doing it here. This is a training ground for that. I'm going to look for that alignment, right? When I'm at my limit of doing push-ups and I feel like I want to collapse, but I know that I have 3 or 4 more in me, if I can just get my mind focused, I'm going to stay here for it. Instead of just looking at that as a physical exercise, it's also a skill that you can bring over into conflict, into arguments where you want to bail out or you want to lash out by staying at your edge, right? Like looking for the alignments of the most important things in your life is a way to beat back overwhelm, because when you can see all of the ties as to why you're doing these things, and ultimately it goes down to your core of knowing who you are as a man. Like I know in my life the reason why I have a meditation practice, a breathwork practice, why I run a podcast, why I do keynote speeches, why I work with men, why I work with women, how I take a leadership role in my family, how I take a leadership role at the Great Man Mastermind, how I'm writing books, how I'm writing articles, right? How I'm talking about men's work, how I'm talking about racial revolutions. Like I'm like, there's a lot that I'm doing, but I don't feel overwhelmed by it because I know where all of it aligns. It all stems from the same place. And if I didn't know that, this would be overwhelming. My back would be in pain. My shoulders would be heavy. So if you start to look for the alignments in all of the things that you are doing, then you will feel less overwhelmed. And also you will probably recognize things that are completely out of alignment, which will then allow you to prune. So perhaps I should have talked about alignments before pruning. So here you have it. 2 ways to beat overwhelm: pruning and aligning. And remembering always that your great man within never gets overwhelmed. So anytime you feel a sense of overwhelm, before reacting, pause and ask the great man within you, what would you do next?